Let me make sure we're all on the same page. Of course we are, but just to confirm it, space, it's a $300 billion industry worldwide. NASA is actually a tiny percent of that. Interesting how small a percent NASA is to the total world spending of space. That little bit, however, is what inspires dreams. Every corporation in here with representatives to this conference, if you ever even touched a science mission, you lead off with that in your quarterly reports, in your annual reports. Because it inspires, it is the act of discovery that empowers nations in the world to undertake these activities. We know this. Here's the problem. As best as I can judge, people outside of the space community view the space community, by and large, as a special interest group. Special interest. And in the following way. All right, so monies get distributed to districts, so representatives fight for those monies so they can have the jobs in their district. How much fighting do other representatives do for NASA, for space industry, if they don't have space industry or a NASA center in their district? Hardly at all. Hardly at all. So NASA's actually lucky that it's got 10 centers scattered across 8 states. It's lucky. It's not clear what NASA's survival factor would have been over the decades if it didn't have that breadth of representation. Not only that, those states in which it's represented typically flip back and forth between Republican and Democrat. Typically. Or if you look at the balance, if they don't flip, you look at the total balance between the parties among those 8 states, it's about 50-50 over the years. So there is even partisan balance to the support for NASA when it's there. But nonetheless, it's by and large thought of as special interest. And here's what's interesting, I think. There's space tapped heavily in the service of the military. There's space tapped heavily in the service of weather satellites, communication. But you know something? If you do your job perfectly, it's the kind of job where nobody notices. If we are protected by a web of space-borne military satellites and we are not attacked, that gets unnoticed. We're driving down the road, running our GPS, it is working, we find our destination. Nobody's thinking about satellites. They're just thinking, did they get to their destination in time? It's like shaving. No one will come up to you and say, hey, you shaved real good today. The act of doing it perfectly is the measure of it going unnoticed. Mowing your lawn. You can mow your lawn perfectly. That means no one's gonna notice it. So there's a hidden dimension to the role that space plays in our culture. That when it's done perfectly, it goes unnoticed. Or, at best, is just taken for granted. All right. I have more evidence of this. I recently delivered a testimony to the Senate, the Subcommittee on Commerce, Transportation, and Science. It's about NASA, really about space and our ambitions. That committee has 24 senators. 3 showed up. That's in my expectations. That's not a complaint that I'm lodging here. It's an observation I'm sharing with you. Okay? Who are those 3 senators? Senators with important NASA properties in their states. We had representation from Texas, representation from Florida, the 2 big ones right there. Sorry, headquarters. We got Kennedy and Johnson. They're there. Senator from New Mexico, trying to make sure New Mexico doesn't miss out on something that could be happening in the future of space. That was it. To me, that's a measure of the fact that the Senate thinks of space as special interest. Because only those senators that had direct interest in their states were there for the hearing. And I kept thinking to myself, really, that's not who I should be speaking to. I want to speak to you guys. Stay home. Bring me everybody else who doesn't understand what the role of this epic adventure is. I was hoping C-SPAN would be there to film it. They were not. So I said, you mean this testimony is just going to get deposited in the congressional record? But there was a camera there, and it in fact was filmed, and somebody posted it on YouTube. It's there. It's there. Fortunately, it is reaching the people for whom the Senate, Congress, and the President work. President works for us. Congress works for us. So when people say, oh, do you want access to a senator so you can try to convince him or her of some, I want access to the people. In a democracy, that's supposed to matter. And however delusional I might be, I still think it does matter. A little bit more about this special interest bit. We all remember the exact instant. You might even remember where you were in your life when Newt Gingrich said he wants to put moon colonies on the moon. He's in Florida. He said, I want moon colonies. Okay. By the way, that ambition is not as ambitious as Kennedy in 1961 saying, let's walk on the moon. We didn't yet have a vehicle that wouldn't kill an astronaut for being launched. So I found it curious that certain sectors criticized Gingrich for wanting a moon colony. In fact, there was a partisan divide, because I got interviewed when he made that statement. So I analyzed it. I said, moon colony, it's all right. I think his plan to enable that needs some work. I might have chosen different words for that, but his plan could use some, but basically he's trying to jumpstart our space ambitions. The liberal press reported on my commentary by saying Tyson shoots down Gingrich's moon proposal. The conservative press reported on the same words that I had spoken, reported Tyson sympathetic with Gingrich's moon proposal. So there's a lens that is split, a partisan lens, split into two parts that, in my judgment and from my view, is interfering with the consensus that needs to be driven to make real decisions happen. So that's actually not what I came here to talk to you about. I just wanted to just put us all on the same page. I want to talk about space, not as spin-offs, not as industry, not as weather sound. No. I want to talk to you about space as culture. Space as culture. You know, the first hunk of hardware that had the power to exit Earth's atmosphere, that was the V2 rocket, of course. Everybody knew Wernher von Braun all the way down. Everybody knew that if we have any future in space, it's going to have to borrow some of that technology, if not all of it. The 1950s descends upon us. You remember the V2 rocket? It was kind of bullet-shaped, had these huge fins. Cars had fins in the 1950s. Where do you think those fins came from? All right, I proposed the experiment. You could probably dig up the designers of those cars and they'll say, well, fin just kind of look cool. They're probably not even thinking about the fins of the V2 rocket. They're probably not even thinking about it, all right? And if it's there, maybe it's just not in their frontal lobe. But our cars had fins. When did the fins go away? After we learned that the V2 shape and those fins, that's not quite the rocket we're gonna need to get to the moon. Our rockets start looking like the Saturn V rather than the V2. By the way, that V2 rocket shape, that was the rocket in every science fiction story told in the 1950s. Just go back, rent any movie on Netflix from that era, their rockets got fins. I have 2 books. Bob Barr Goes to the Moon and Tintin Goes to the Moon. They're in rockets with fins. I collect stuff like that. Saturn V emerges. The fins go away. What happened to those fins on the Bel Air and on the 57 Chevy? They're all gone. Oh, so maybe the designer just felt, oh, it's played itself out. Or maybe deep down inside, space was operating on their creativity. So what happens? The 60s are underway. We're going to the moon in a big way. Everybody knows it. We are innovating. We have an innovative culture. You know it's an innovative culture because every week, every month, a new advance in space garners the headlines. Because a space frontier is being breached. A space frontier. And when you breach a space frontier, there's something new to talk about in that day's paper. Something new to talk about. Every next Gemini mission more ambitious than the previous one. Typically redoing what did before, and then it went a little extra, a little farther, a little extra docking maneuver. We're ready to transition out of Gemini to Apollo. Let's launch the Apollo rocket, minus one of the stages. Now let's put in all 3 stages. Let's actually go to the moon. Don't land yet, because we're still working that. Well, when was that? That was 1968. I'll get back to that in a minute. What else was going on in the 60s? Everybody was dreaming about tomorrow. Everybody. That's what the World's Fair was all about. It wasn't about yesterday. It wasn't about today. It was about tomorrow. The kind of tomorrow that could only be brought into the present by the ingenuity of scientists and engineers. And people knew this. How else is space influencing? Okay, how about the Unisphere? Gorgeous steel Earth sitting there. It's got 3 rings around it. Okay, go to the designer and they'll say, well, I just put on the rings. Well, did the 3 orbits of John Glenn influence? Oh, well, I don't know, I don't think so. But it's got 3 rings, not 2, not 4, and the rings are not going polar, they're going equatorial. 3 rings around an Earth. 1964. New York World's Fair. The 1960s is the bloodiest decade in American history since the Civil War, since the 1860s. Servicemen killed weekly, reported in the weekly papers. Campus unrest, civil rights movement playing out in the weekly news. That's the 1960s. The bloodiest year in that bloodiest decade? 1968. The Tet Offensive in February of that year. Martin Luther King assassinated, RFK assassinated. Yet, somehow we managed to still dream about tomorrow. It was still in us. It still mattered. It's what birthed the Star Trek television series. By my measure, one of the greatest television shows ever, The Twilight Zone, was heavily influenced by space themes. Every third episode, there's some space concept being delivered to you, telling another story through the lens of a space story. Our presence in space is affecting not only the engineers and the mathematicians and the scientists, it's affecting the creative dimension of that which we call culture. We are living it at every turn. Hardly what I'd call a special interest. What happens in December 1968? How do you cap off that year? Apollo 8. An underappreciated Apollo mission, not by this audience, but by anybody else. Most people never heard of it. Apollo 8, what's that? Excuse me, that was the first time anybody ever left Earth. With a destination in mind. Yeah, figure eight it around the moon. Photo of Earth rising over the lunar landscape. The photo is really misnamed because the moon is tidally locked to Earth. So Earth is always in the sky on the near side of the moon. Always. So it only was rising because, in fact, they were figure eighting around the moon and Earth rose up. That photo, we all know it. Earthrise over the moon. There was Earth, seen not as the map maker would have you identify it. No, the countries were not color-coded with boundaries. It was seen as nature intended it to be viewed. Oceans, land, clouds. We went to the moon and we discovered Earth. I claim we discovered Earth for the first time. How does that affect culture? I got a list. You could take apart this list and come up with an explanation that does not directly reference space for everything on this list. You could probably do that. But I take a step back and I look at that list and I say, wait a minute. How is it? Let's back up to 1962 briefly. Rachel Carson publishes Silent Spring. The Green Movement typically credits that as the birth of ecology, the birth of caring about the environment. It was a best-selling book. I have a different view. Maybe it planted some seeds, maybe it tilled the landscape. But stuff didn't really start happening until after that photo of Earthrise over the moon was published. 1968, the whole Earth catalog is published. There's a version before that photo is printed. The instant that photo comes out, that is the identifying cover picture of the whole Earth catalog. Thinking about Earth as a whole. Not as a place where nations war, as a whole. 7 months later, 1969, we land on the moon. 1970, we're still going to the moon. We go until 1972, so watch this sequence of events. 1970, the Comprehensive Clean Air Act is passed. There were two other versions of that in the 60s, 1963 and 67. But the most important rendering of that act came in 1970. Earth Day was birthed March 1970. The Environmental Protection Agency was founded in 1970. There was a film called The Hellstrom Chronicle. It was one of the first pseudo-documentaries to actually get first run in the theaters. It was all about insects kind of It was a scare movie about insects and what role they might play on our food supply as we go forward. But it got us thinking about nature. The organization Doctors Without Borders was founded in 1971. Where do you even get that phrase from? No one thought of that phrase before that photo was published. Because every globe in your classroom has countries painted on it. Doctors Without Borders, 1971. DDT gets banned, not right after Rachel Carson's book, gets banned in 1972. We're still going to the moon. We're still looking back to Earth. Clean Water Act, 1971, 1972. Endangered Species Act, two versions of that in the 1960s. The most comprehensive version, 1973. The catalytic converter gets put in 1973. Unleaded gas, 1973. We're still at war in Vietnam. There's still campus unrest. Yet we found the time to start thinking about Earth. That is space operating on our culture, and you cannot even put a price on that. That is a nation, that is a world reacting to a new perspective on what it is to be alive on this planet that we all share. And out of that era, an entire generation of people, they think, they feel, they intellectualize about space. We see it in the art. We see it in Hollywood. We see it in television productions. Storytellers. That's because the space frontier was crossed weekly. You know, back then, you didn't need special programs to convince people that science was a good thing in school. You didn't need special programs to show people that engineering and math, the STEM fields, that these are useful to society, to our identity as a nation. Because the headlines that were writ large over that era had built into them the fact that innovation created those headlines. Innovation brought to you by an ambitious community of scientists, technologists, engineers, and mathematicians. So what happens? Mid-1970s come. It all ends. By the way, I have a collection of magazines. Look. Life, Time, even Collier's going back into the 1950s. They all talked about tomorrow. How many issues did you have to wait before there was an article about the city of tomorrow, the home of tomorrow, transportation of tomorrow? It was in our culture, it was in our mindset, it was in our zeitgeist. 1970s come around. That all ended. The space frontier stopped being breached. We did other things. By the way, there was an engineering frontier that we took on. How do you make a reusable spacecraft? How do you build something in zero G? Something big, like a space station. All this comes in the next 10 to 20 years. That's advancing an engineering frontier. It's not advancing a space frontier. And if I may put some of this in perspective, remember that schoolroom globe I was telling you about? Take Earth, shrink it to a schoolroom globe, and ask, how far away is Mars on that scale? It's a mile away. How far away is the moon? 30 feet away. Most people get that distance wrong because in textbooks, they have to fit the moon on the same page as the Earth. So you think moon is much closer than it actually is. We've been lied to over all those years. If you drew Earth as a natural 3-inch size circle on a textbook page, the moon would have to be several pages back from that. You need a fold out to check it out. Mars is a mile away, the moon 30 feet away. The International Space Station space shuttle orbiting Earth 3/8 of an inch above its surface. That's not advancing a space frontier. some other kind of front, not space frontier, I assert. By the way, the thickness of Earth's atmosphere, on that scale, it's the thickness of the lacquer on the globe. That's how thin this air is that we breathe, that we think of as an ocean of air. It is as thin to the earth as the skin of an apple is to an apple, as the lacquer is to a schoolroom globe. So you gotta love the space entrepreneurs who are taking tourists up above the atmosphere, but we're kind of telling them that that's space. And I look at Earth and I come to it as an astrophysicist and I see the rest of the cosmos and I say you got some more work to do on that one. Okay, keep at it, guys. I get just a couple, no, I'm almost done here. Sorry, taking so long. Plus, if we have time for Q&A, I'd love to hear what's coursing in your minds, especially this audience. All right, so what are the current problems? Here in America, not other parts of the world. Here in America, our economy is in the toilet. Hardly anybody's interested in the STEM fields. Our jobs are going overseas, and you have politicians that are pretty sure they have a solution to that. Oh, you need more science kids in the school? Let's make better science teachers. There's a Band-Aid for you. Put that right there. Throw a couple of dollars on that one. That ought to fix that. How about our jobs going overseas? Okay, let me think about that. All right, how about put in some tariffs and make some tax incentives in the community? We'll keep the factory right there. Another Band-Aid. People aren't innovating? So we put money in sort of innovation businesses. Okay. These are all Band-Aids, people. They're Band-Aids. Here's what we gotta do. And I've said this 1 billion times. You double NASA's budget. Right now it's a half a penny on a dollar. Half a penny. That pays for everything. Space station, all the centers, the Hubble telescope, the James Webb, the rover, the Kepler, everybody is out of that half a penny. Double it. Double it to a penny. That's all I'm gonna say, double it. And here's what you do. I'm a little unorthodox in this vision statement. I'm not gonna twist people's arms, let me just put it out there. I don't wanna be driven by one destination or another. I don't want to say, our next thing we're going to do in space, we're going to go to Mars. It's like, excuse me, how about all the rest of space? You know what I want to do when you double the budget? Let's create a suite of launch vehicles. We're kind of sort of doing that now, but let's do that as the focus. A suite of launch vehicles with strap-ons, whatever you need. One configuration will get you to the moon. Another will get you to a Lagrangian point. Another will get you to Mars. Another will get you to the Earth-Sun L2, another Lagrangian point. Maybe there's an asteroid headed our way. We want to do something about that. We got another special configuration of rockets that'll get us there. So we create a suite of vehicles that gives us access to space. When Eisenhower came back from Europe after he saw the Autobahn and how it survived heavy climactic variation and troop maneuvers, he said, I want some of those in my country. All right, so he gets everyone to agree to build the interstate system. Did he say, I just want to build it from New York to LA because that's where you should go? No, the interstate system connects everybody in whatever way you want. That's how you grow a system. And I'm not going to discriminate. If there's a military reason to do something on the moon, we got the launch vehicles to do it. If there's a tourist reason to go to the backside of the moon, well, that's another configuration. You want to mine the moon? That's another one. Scientists want to study, see if there's life on Mars? We'll do that too. Everybody's space interest gets served by this capacity. And when you do this, you guarantee that you are advancing a space frontier every week. And I can guarantee you, every week there's going to be a new headline. Astronauts, engineers found a way to extract the water from the soils of Mars, separate the hydrogen and oxygen. We now have a supply of rocket fuel on Mars, a fill-in station, so you don't have to carry all your fuel with you. We're mining helium-3 on the lunar surface. I don't know if it's cheap enough to bring it back here to Earth, set up some other nuclear reactor somewhere else in space. Whatever are the needs or urges, be they geopolitical, military, economic, space becomes that frontier. And you know, every week some new invention is going to be granted, some new patent is going to be offered. Because space is hard, space is dangerous, space is exciting. Not only do you innovate, these innovations make headlines, and those headlines work their way down the educational pipeline, and everybody in school knows about it. You don't have to set up a program to convince people that being an engineer is cool. They'll know it just by the cultural presence of those activities. You do that, it'll jumpstart our dreams. That's what it'll do. And you know innovation drives economies. It's especially been true since the Industrial Revolution. You double NASA's budget. It's not a handout. That's what it is today. That's what everyone thinks it is. It's a handout for special interest. You know what Mitt Romney got wrong when he criticized Newt Gingrich for pandering to Florida, the Florida constituency, by saying he'll do all these nice things for NASA? Romney said, you're just pandering to Florida. If you go to New Hampshire, you'll tell them something else about some bridge that they want. There's a deep misunderstanding there. The very statement that talking about NASA is pandering omits the fact that NASA drives our economy. The culture of NASA drives the culture of innovation, and it's the culture of innovation that drives the economies of the 21st century. That's what it's missing. Even if there's pork spending on NASA, even if there's pork, what comes out of that spending benefits the nation in ways that a power plant or a bridge or a local road does not. I can be honest about that, even if some of you can't, because you're in it, you're too close, I can say it, and I'm saying it. You know what happens? The jobs do not go overseas. You don't have to set up tax benefits. They don't go overseas because we're innovating and they haven't figured out how to do it yet. It has to stay here in America. And you have to keep innovating. They'll eventually catch up, fine, hand it to them. You can't simultaneously assert that we are a global economy and then cry foul if a corporation takes a plant overseas where the labor's cheaper. That's kind of part of how that works. So the solution is not trying to just prevent that with laws. You innovate so that it doesn't happen in the first place. Teacher training? We need that. It is a necessary but insufficient condition to make this happen. You can have an awesome teacher in middle school, high school. Now you want to become a scientist. You come out the other end of that educational pipeline. What do? We lost an entire generation of these smart people. They became like investment bankers or lawyers out of the 1980s and 90s because there's no place for them to take their interest in science. You have big, bold, ambitious projects, you get them all. Especially since the NASA science portfolio involves biologists. We're looking for life. It's got chemists, geologists, astrophysicists, physicists. The NASA portfolio touches all of these. Not only that, we need the electrical engineers, the mechanical engineers, the structural engineers. is a one-agency showdown. If we have an innovation culture, we'll resurrect some of that attitude we all had in the 1960s. Except this time it'll be without the tandem expensive war that was conducted. By the way, if China wants to put military bases on Mars, we're on Mars in 10 months. You know that, okay? They just have to leak that memo. Doesn't even have to be true. We'll take 1 month to fund, design, and build the craft, and 9 months to get to Mars. We'll be on Mars in 10 months. We already understand our resolve when we feel threatened. That aspect will remain. That capacity to react will remain. The difference is we need to look at NASA not as a handout, but as an investment. Because I can tell you that as goes the health of spacefaring ambitions, so too goes the spiritual, the emotional, the intellectual, the creative, and the economic ambitions of a nation. So goes the future of America. Thank you all.